Hey guys, it's Gemma from ASD Rocks. I was asked to do something about how we currently are scoring children with autism. So we used to go in Australia. I wasn't going to do it, and then because initially when I started ASD Rocks, it was about helping parents in Australia manage to create, to understand their kids and create a more loving environment, or a more supportive environment where their kids could thrive. And then Australia changed from using the CARS score, which was a phenomenal way of making a diagnosis, into and then they bunched that into what we call levels, and we only have 3 levels of autism. So they really took the incredible variety that we had in autism being on a scale, and stuffed it into 3 sections of can, cannot, and sometimes can. So I'm going to explain this to start with the CARS score, and I also have here a piece of paperwork in Australia. If you are in a country that still uses the CARS score, I'm going to explain that, and hopefully you will get a really good understanding of how your child is given a diagnosis, and hopefully that the CARS score will never ever go away, and you will never be replaced with something as pitiful as what bunching something so varied, agreed to be so varied, as autism, and a scale of, or a spectrum of autism, into a 1, 2, or 3. So the CARS is basically, the way it works is it's a test, which is, I've been printing stuff out for you guys. I must have left it. So it's a score that's given, usually you would go to a pediatrician, a developmental pediatrician, someone like that, and they are going to look at specific areas of your child. So these areas are going to include relating to people, imitation, emotional response, body use, object use, adaptation to change, visual responses to things, listening, responding, taste, smell, touch, and use responses. So when they say use responses and use responses and object use, so the question really ultimately comes down with, go Finn, when you give a child a car, okay, and we're talking a small child, between the ages of 12 months to 2 years, even older, they will recognize it as a car. Most children will brum, brum, brum. On the autism spectrum, especially in my case, in my son's case, this was never used as a car. It was used as something that you could, God, go Finn, line up. I don't know if he's got any other cars here. But he would, anything that he could have, he would sort of line them up, and you would find these huge long lines of things. They weren't used as cars. He never picked up any of that imaginary play, that brum, 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 never ever did anything like that. So when we talk about response of use, and we talk about object use, we're talking about whether that, not whether they can pick it up and hold it. It's not a motor skill thing. We're talking, are they using those things the way they were intended to be used? That's a really big thing. So taste, smell, touch, response, and use, fear or nervousness, verbal communication, non-verbal communication. We've covered verbal and non-verbal communication in a lot of other vlogs, so if you're not sure, just get on and have a look. Activity level. So activity level will include not necessarily you know, with other people. It's not about activity level interacting. Intellectual response, and then there'll be general impressions. Now, the score goes from, I think it starts between 15 and it goes to 60. So as someone, as a pediatrician is, oh, Finn, your desk is amazing. As a pediatrician is sitting down with your child, they will have the CARS score sheet with them, and they'll be marking a number. So, for example, relating to people, one of the biggest things that that happened when we first went to see the great and powerful Richard Eisenmeyer, who I am forever thankful for helping me to understand the world of autism, because if he hadn't helped me understand the world of autism, Bo wouldn't be where he is, you know. So it was the first time I had booked in to see him, and he came out into the reception, and Bo was sitting there and playing with one of those wooden sort of puzzles where you push the shapes across and they go through loops, and he was sitting there like that, and Richard walked out and he took one look at Bo, and then he took one look at me, and then he looked at Bo and he said, "We'll just take that in with us, shall we?" I was like, this guy gets it, right? This guy gets it. He's settled, he's playing, he would be happily playing with that for the next 3 hours. Now, I've also made a video about the fact that Bo was born autistic, and he was so completely within his bubble that he didn't relate to people at all. In fact, he didn't even notice if people walked in the room. He didn't notice if you called him by his name. So, you know, you'd get a high score between 15 and 60 for Bo on that in that way. Imitation, again, we're talking about imitating things like play, car. They may have a few things around that they, you know, imitate with. Kids always imitate. In fact, oh my God, if you just watch that video where my heart got broken because I was with this most amazing, beautiful baby boy, and he was imitating me. I was going, oh, and he was going, oh, you know, and we were just playing and communicating, and it was all imitation. I'd go, look up there, look at this, and he'd go, oh, you know, and Bo was never like that. It's not about pointing. This is really important, guys. This isn't about pointing. Bo pointed, you know, but imitation of, you know, peekaboo. As you may have seen in some of Bo's earlier videos, I think in the 0 to 2 year category, Bo not only does not imitate me when we sing the song Clap, Clap, Clap Your Hands, but he makes me clap for him. He takes my hands and claps. He doesn't clap himself. So imitation. So again, you would get quite a high score if you're not getting any response. Again, adaptation to change. Not so great. So the way that this, I've done a little drawing for you so you can understand it. Understanding that, I've written 0 here, but it's not, it's 15. That we start at 15. So you start at 15 and you go to 60. Okay, now the idea is that anything sort of below 15, 15 is what we would consider typical, atypical human being. Understanding that there are the opposites of autism. So from 0 to 15 would be, you know, a very low score might indicate that you have a child that has something else, not autism, that needs to be looked into, but isn't within that autism spectrum. So 15, the way I've done it is that 15 to 30 is what we would call, so you or I or any person that is considered a typical person. This is not about ADHD. This is not about GDD and OS. This is not about, right? This is an autism spectrum, right? Scale. and it goes from 15 to 30. Now, 30 is where you really start worrying. Anything between 50 and 30, where it's you and I, we all talk about, oh, you know, everyone's got a little bit of autism. I don't necessarily agree with that. I agree that we all do have specific things within us that, or characteristics that are similar. Some of us are more obsessive compulsive than others, but it doesn't mean that we're autistic. Some of us are more, social than others, and you might have a quite shy personality type. It doesn't mean that you're nonverbal. You know, if I can't dance, it doesn't mean I've got a little bit of paraplegia. It means, you know, I can't dance. So it's really important to understand that this scale here will trigger up on regular people, a little bit of OCD going on there, needs routine, listening responses. Who do we know out of how many typical people that just don't have great listening responses? So this 15 to 30 is your typical, and then anywhere from 30 to 60. Now that's a big scale, and that's why I sort of wanted to point out that it's a scale. It's not just, you know, this straight line heaving up. 30 to 60 is a really big scale, and that's where you get your CARS score, okay? So CARS stands for Children Autism Rating Scale. That's all it is. Children Autism Rating Scale. Where does my child from 30, where we hit a diagnosis? So if you're at 29, okay, maybe you're having difficulties with speech and you need speech therapy, but it may not necessarily be due to an autism diagnosis. It may have some other things that are going on. There may be cognitive issues. You may have behavioral issues in a child. It may not be autism, okay? So 30, once we get to 30, that's where we really hit, okay, you are now ticking all of these points within the autism spectrum. Okay, so 30 to 60, we then end up with your 60 would be your completely nonverbal, completely zero life skills, no communication, verbal or nonverbal, inability to manage change, most likely requiring something like 24-hour help and care, no toileting, feeding and those sorts of things, right up through to the age. There's no age group here, although the CARS score is specifically for children. As we all know, autism doesn't just go away. You can certainly work with things, but when you ended up with a 60 100 years ago as a child, a lot of those kids would be just turfed into a sanitarium and they'd stay there chained to a wall and they'd stay at a 60. We now know that whereas a 3-year-old may score here and then with work may end up down here with early intervention, or may score quite high, but with intensive programming we can alter certain behaviors with what we know works, this early intervention and this extra care, extra love, extra time, extra patience, extra explaining. Okay, so that is the CARS score. So if you have a child that rests on the CARS, if you're in a country and you're getting a pediatrician or a diagnosis and your country uses the CARS scale, which was a global scale and it was a brilliant scale, this is what you're looking at. This is what you're looking for. So any child that scores between 20 to 30, okay, you may not get a diagnosis of autism, but you may have something else going on there, and that's up to the pediatrician. Then you don't be fixated on going to get my diagnosis of autism. There may be loads of stuff out there that you hadn't considered that it could very well be. And a proper diagnosis, over-labeling is really, really problematic. So don't be disappointed because you didn't get a diagnosis of autism and you were so sure because it was displaying characteristics. This is, this section here is why that's there. Okay, so from 20 to 30, yeah, sure, we're getting behavioral issues. Maybe we're getting, eating issues. We're getting sort of symptoms that seem like it's in autism, but is actually caused by other cognitive behavioral deficiencies. So there you go. That is your CARS scale. Now, the wonderful country of Australia, and in their infinite wisdom, decided to take this massive scale that included an understanding of how all humans are on this scale together, but not necessarily labelled as the same thing, and decided to pop it into a 1, 2, or a 3. This is what we currently have in Australia now. You are a level 1, you are a level 2, or a level 3. Level 1 is basically, we don't really care about you. You're obviously struggling, but level 1, you're not going to get any funding, and with a bit of work, you'll be just fine. Level 3 is that 60, right? That completely immobile, needs help walking, needs help toileting, needs help eating, right? And so this level 2 thing has really squished for so many points into it that it's just ridiculous. So that's how it works in Australia. We just have 1, 2, and 3. Now, what I've got here is exactly what you will be needing to fill out in Australia for your educational needs questionnaire, okay? It works on, so this is the funding that you will get based on, they will give you a level 1, 2, or 3 funding, and you have to fill this out when you go to mainstream school. They will ask you about mobility, fine motor skills, receptive communication, expressive communication, challenges, excess behaviour, for example, safety, hearing, vision, self-care and toileting, and any medical issues, as well as cognitive skills. Now, just as an example, because obviously I'm not going to go through this whole thing for everyone, it just simply doesn't apply to everyone. However, these are pretty easy to get your hands on. If you don't have one, if you want one, a copy of one, feel free to contact me, because your funding for aid time will be completely reliant on this, regardless of whether your child is a level 2 or a level 3. You will still have to go through this funding when you go to school. Yay! More paperwork. So I'm going to give you just the first one as an example, and what you have to do, they give you in different categories. They basically give you put a score down between pretty much 1 and 7. Okay, this is a really good easy one. Safety just gives you an idea of minimalistic stuff. So you have to score between 1 and 4, okay? And they give you examples of what 1 and 4 are. So you have to circle the 1, you have to give them a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, and you've got to write it down in this little box here. So, safety, number 1, child is capable of operating safely in most school environments. Most. Does that mean yours? Who knows? 2, requires supervision in certain activities. What child doesn't? I'm sorry. 3, requires constant supervision in a range of activities. Okay, now we're starting to get to where I would say would be like a very basic one for an autism. Or 4 is not able to operate safely in school environments without intensive supervision. So then it gives you little examples, because obviously, how do you score your child? Obviously, if your child is going into mainstream school, we're hoping they're not a 4, because we have amazing facilities in Australia for special needs schools, which I am a massive fan of. And again, we'll say it over and over, those special schools, we would not be where we were had it not been for those special schools and the help they provided. So we're hoping that these kids aren't got a 4 who is not able to operate safely in a school environment without intensive supervision. Why is that on here? Who knows? Because that student shouldn't be in mainstream. But example of a level 2, which requires supervision in certain activities. So this student requires supervision beyond that required for age-appropriate students at certain times of the day, either in the classroom or in the playground. An example is the need for supervision in woodwork classes. My child in a woodwork class. Sorry, what a stupid... Yeah, woodwork classes. To guard against the student being injured at other times of the day. In general, classroom and in playground, the student is able to operate with normal supervision provision. So that would be a 2. So if it was art, maybe my kid would get a 2, but there's no way in woodwork that my kid would get a 2. In fact, my kid would get a 4. Anyway, this is the paradoxical problem that we have at the moment in Australia with what we're doing, because our funding for teachers and aides through the Department of Education does not just rely on whether you got a level 1, 2 or 3 diagnosis. And a 1, 2 or 3 diagnosis really doesn't give anybody an indication of what level your child is at, because as you can see, a 1, 2 or 3 covers up to 30 points. How do you group those 30 points? It's just with autism being so varied and so varied, we all say it, everybody says, no 2 autistic kids are the same. So how you can group them into 3 groups, I have no idea. Anyway, that one is for you. You know who you are because you asked about the how we do the scoring system in Australia. I initially said I wouldn't do this video because I didn't think it would help all the people around the world. But if you do have a country that is using the CARS score at the moment, thank your lucky stars. If you don't, just remember when you're filling out these forms that you really need to think on the higher side of caution, because you will be severely underfunded in any mainstream school. Now, the other thing also to remember with your level 1, 2 and 3 funding for Australia, and again, I'm sorry guys, I am being Australia specific. The way the education department works here is that when you finish primary school, you lose your funding and you have to reapply. So whatever funding you had in primary school, that's gone and you have to reapply. Most kids will lose their funding. So going from grade 6 primary school into year 7 or form 1, that you have to then fill this out again, because the government acknowledges that with the right kind of work and intervention, a child can make incredible progress. The problem with that is they want to know if they've progressed, because they don't want to fund for the amount that of what they needed beforehand. So you will have to apply 100% of the time. You will have to apply. 90% of people get knocked back for any funding, because you find that if you have had early intervention, your child is better, and therefore your funding gets dropped, or you don't get funding at all. Please take a look at my other vlogs in regards to appealing your funding for mainstream school and those sorts of things, because it's all very pertinent to this. The other absolute beauty about the Education Department and the Australian government is that once your child starts a year 11, year 12, so subject, so even if you're trying to spread out a VCE component, so VCE is our, what do you call them? Oh, it's all different in different countries. You've got O levels and the American one is the SAT scores, and it's the 2 final years of school. Now in Australia, you're allowed to take one of those subjects in year 10, just to help you spread out that work a bit, so you can do a unit of whatever you would have done in the next 2 years. You can do one in the early years, so it's a bit easier for you to get through the next 2 years over a more spread out. If you enter VCE or even just one subject of this certificate, you lose your funding immediately. It is done, dusted. The powers that fund deem that if you can do VCE, whether you can tie your shoelaces or not, whether you can toilet yourself or not, whether you can undo your belt or not, just because you happen to be, for example, like Bo, mathematically inclined, who is currently doing physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and psychology, which is more biology and chemistry at the moment anyway. He is deemed as not, that's it. If you can do that, well, it's not just about the fact that that's the way your brain thinks, and you can't ride a bike, or you can't make your own dinner, or if you wore a belt to school you would struggle. They don't care. You lose your funding. So Bo has lost his funding. We are not approved for the Victorian Education funding program, because that's what they say. So thanks, guys. It's been a really easy year this year, and I really look forward to the next 2 years of probably the hardest years of my autistic child's life academically, where we still have to even work out if he's ever going to be able to get a job, let alone, just trying to help him through the 2 hardest years of high school without any funding, no aids, lost everything, just because you think that because he's doing VCE, he's clearly absolutely fine. So there's the joys of funding the CARS score, the level 1, 2, 3 in Australia. And look, I can complain, won't do any good. The fact is, this is why I do what I do, and I've been doing it for 17 years. Lockdown was no different for me. I've been homeschooling since Bo was born. The fact that I have to now do that in VCE is the only difficult part, is that I don't know the subjects. In psychology I took when I was a kid, and I can help in and English as well. So the two absolute standards that you have to take, math and English. The rest you can sort of play around with and choose. Some kids do drama, or some kids do, I don't know, photography or art. I don't know what your choices are. I do know that we had to go with what Bo the way Bo thinks, and he thinks mathematically. He thinks, you know, numbers just lie down for him, and so we're going that way. But I can't help him, and it's really annoying not being able to get any funding for someone who can within the education. And NDIS, by the way, which is the Australian, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which they've now changed to NDIA because they've realised what a scheme it is. They do not get involved in anything to do with the education department. So you cannot get funding through disability for education. They are separated, okay? So that is why if you've got funding for disability in your NDIA, you still have to fill out this form for the Department of Education, because no funding from the Australian government, even for a state school, will go towards AIDS. That is the Department of Education's jurisdiction. So don't get that confused. Do not ask for funding for school. They will reject you immediately. Do not ask for aid type. It has to be outside of school hours. Anything that is school, that's now me. I go to school, I sit with him at recess time or lunchtime, or I go to school and I help him out with, you know, if I need to go into class or pull him aside or explain anything, because or if the, you know, having said that, the teachers are so goddamn amazing at the school that I go to, that constant, I'm constantly every day being updated. But I have a homeschooling program that I've got to get done for Bo, because I have to have him prepared for the next term to the level where the other kids are, because the funding is gone and it's finished. Anyway, okay, hope that helps. And I've pulled out a bunch, you can see possibly I've got a huge amount of paperwork on my desk over there. I pulled out a bunch of really interesting stuff that I found while I was digging these papers out to try and help you with the CARS score, and I found some really interesting stuff. So I will do some videos on the stuff that I found that I think might help. All right, guys, ASD.